right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for coming out here on a beautiful evening. A little warm, but it's certainly a beautiful evening for the 17th annual Stillwater Veterans Memorial Benefit Dinner Cruise on the beautiful St. Croix River. Dave Rattay is the name. I'm the chairman of the Stillwater Veterans Memorial as well as your MC for the night. Hey, Larry. Speaking on behalf of the Stillwater Veterans Memorial Board, we welcome you underway. It continues to be an exciting time for the residents around this area of the St. Croix Valley. We just passed our new bridge there. Hopefully you saw as we went by. The good news is you're going to get to see it again as we go back. When we go back, or at least you hope you'll see it again as we go back. And it's just this month we celebrated the first anniversary of the opening of that St. Croix River Bridge, and beautiful as it is. It's also the time that you notice that we've shut down the regular lift bridge, the 1931 iconic lift bridge in Stillwater. It's been shut down, it's being overhauled, some of it being painted green, but this time next year should be open to foot traffic and bicycle traffic, and many of us are excited just for that purpose. So please take the time while you're out here on this beautiful river to enjoy the scenery. You obviously have a lot of boats out there, but there's a chance to see eagles and cormorants and other seagulls, etc. So please keep your eye outside for the waterscape and the scenery, and the weathered eye for the wildlife that teem the river and the shores. So as we turn our sights back inward to the paddle wheel, it's such great to see a wonderful turnout and recognition and honor of our assembled veterans. Again, this year, our World War II and Korea conflict veterans are special honored guests. If we could, can we see a show by hands of our World War II and Korea veterans? Show your hands both upstairs and down. Now, from our count, there was 29 World War II veterans and 22 Korean conflict veterans that signed up. We do know that a few couldn't make it, and for that, I know a couple folks are going to bring a program to kind of share what we were doing with them. A couple folks are also taking this back with them. Please do, so you can show if you had a World War II or Korea veteran who was not able to show up and their name's on this list, please bring it back so they know that we were thinking of them. There are a couple names that didn't make it to the list, and for that we're sorry. We tried to get everybody, but I do know Richard Rudolph from Osceola, he's here with us tonight, and his name's not on the list, but thank you all for being there. We are very proud of our veteran service, what all the veterans have done on behalf of our country, and for what American veterans have done for the countries and peoples around the world in the 242 years of our country's existence since our country's founding. Additionally, we wish to thank all of you for your support of veteran issues, and specifically our Stillwater Veterans Memorial. We would not be out in the river here today, nor would the Stillwater Veterans Memorial exist, were it not for the support of every one of you here tonight, and many more that are out there. We are particularly thankful for the ongoing and ever-increasing support you have provided over the years through attendance at our events, as well as financial help with the memorial. In the last couple of years, you may have noticed we expanded the memorial. We were out of room down there, but we added about 260 more spaces, and about 40 of them are already taken, and I've got another 20 on the list to come. So, we're gonna sell those out as well. And we've also replaced, I mean Joe Roselle, has replaced all the lighting at the spire and the site area there. So thank you, Joe, for your great work. We got LED fixtures, and we've upgraded many of the flowers and planting beds in the area. So our many thanks goes out to the board members and volunteers who helped make that happen. Now, before we get to, oh yeah, there we go. Before we get much further into the program, I want to express the Stillwater Veterans Memorial Board's sincere special thanks to our host, Mr. Dick Anderson of the St. Croix Boat and Packet, and for our skipper here tonight, Captain J.J. Meyer, and for his able-bodied crew under Dave, who got us all safely on board. Thank you for that, and we'll shortly service our delicious meals, and we'll safely return us to shore in a couple hours. Our Fair Cities Memorial relies upon your yearly attendance and Dick Anderson's great generosity to sustain, update, and expand the site, as well as fund the Memorial Day and Veterans Day services we hold yearly, and for that, we, the board, are profoundly grateful. I'd be remiss if I did not mention who's with us here this evening, not at the head table, but in the audience. Our guest speaker is Army veteran, pilot, ophthalmic optician, author, military aircraft Rebuilder and Restorer, Mr. Jim Johns. Thank you, Jim. Jim will be speaking after dinner. He's going to have a compelling discussion on the events surrounding the World War II attack against Hawaii. And he's going to postulate for you, and I'm really looking forward to hearing about why perhaps Pearl Harbor wasn't that sneak attack that we've all been led to believe. And joining him here tonight is his niece, Wanda Heck. Thank you, Wanda. And shortly, you'll hear from fellow board members Tom Simonette and Harriet McPherson, and later from Court Moline after we close out the silent auction. Now, speaking about the auction, please keep checking on the bids throughout the evening and bid them up higher so that the silent auction proceeds from that help us to go put on our events. And there's several items out there I think you'll not want to miss. Bidding closes at 7:30, and we'll announce the winners at 7:45. I mentioned, special folks in the audience. I'd like to make special note of our summertime quartet singers over there. They'll be up here in a second, so thank you, gentlemen. Also with us here tonight is Minnesota State House of Representative Bob Detmer. Bob is a Army veteran himself, so thanks, Bob, for being here. Not sure if he's downstairs or upstairs. We also have Minnesota State House Representative Kathy Lomer, a Blue Star mother with a son who also served in the Army. So thank you for being out here. Both Bob and Kathy are regulars with us. Also regular with us out here is Washington County Attorney Pete Orput, who is himself a Marine Corps veteran. So thanks, Pete, for being here. I know you're out there somewhere. And Dan Starry, our Washington County Sheriff, is underway, so no screwing around or you'll have to have some words with Dan. Okay, so be good sailors out here today and no over drinking like most sailors do. Okay, all right. And I was sailor man, so I know something about that. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, I do want to now invite Tom Simonette to the podium. He's going to provide our invocation, followed by Harriet McPherson, who will provide our fallen comrade toast. And then we're going to hear from the Summertime Quartet. I'll have a couple more words to say, and then we'll have our dinner. Tom.
Good evening, families and friends of Stillwater Veterans Memorial, and especially to our U.S. military veterans with us tonight. Tonight, we ask our Lord, as we sail on the scenic St. Croix River, for his blessing. We humbly give you thanks, O Lord, who has blessed us with many gifts as we gather on this boat to partake in an evening of goodwill. We give thanks to those individuals that raise their right hand to defend the freedoms we cherish so dearly. We say a quiet prayer in our hearts for those defending the home front as their soldiers and sailors, Marines, Coast Guardsmen, and airmen have deployed to the far reaches of the world. We ask you to protect those deployed, and especially the ones in harm's way, with your constant love. When our deployed members have finished their mission, please bring these women and men back to the loving arms of their loved ones. Thank you, Lord, for your love for us as we love you, and bless our meal tonight. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, would you please stand while we read the missing man prayer? Please direct your attention to the small table here in the center of the room for our fallen comrade toast. We dedicate this toast to our fallen heroes from all wars as our most honored guests. You are not forgotten, though you are unable to be here visibly with us tonight. Whenever we gather, we will leave a place for you. Your tablecloth is white, symbolic of the purity of your willing response to your country's call to arms. The single rose reminds us of the families and the loved ones forever left behind. The red ribbon bears witness to the continuing tragedy of our POWs and MIAs as we unceasingly demand a proper accounting for those who are still missing and unaccounted for. There is a slice of lemon there on your plate, keeping us mindful of your bitter fate. There is salt there too, symbolic of the river of tears shed by families and loved ones. The Holy Book present represents the strength gained through faith to sustain those lost from our country. Your glass is inverted because you are not here to toast with us tonight. Your chair is empty because you are not here to sit with us tonight. Our gathering is incomplete because you are not here with us tonight. You were there for us. We are still here for you. In honoring each of you, all of you, we stand silently and face the table of honor, your table. We stand silently in your absence. I think our missing man prayer is even more appropriate this year than it ordinarily is, because we're hearing about all these remains that are coming back from North Korea, which we have been waiting forever for. And many of you know that my big brother was the pilot on a B-29 bomber and went down over North Korea on February 28, 1952. And no word about him forever. And so these remains coming back mean a lot to each of us. We all know somebody who has given their life in the honor of our service. And this is a very special night when we honor all those that aren't here with us, besides all of you that are gathered here. So let's raise our glasses in honor of all our fallen heroes and all our heroes who have come back and who have served our country so well. Hear, hear.
Thank you, Harriet, and please be seated. And I now invite up the Summertime Quartet Singers. They'll entertain you as they're making their way up here. I want to mention a couple things. One is if you're missing a pair of sunglasses, they'll be here. You can pick them up at the podium or at the table back there. And then lastly, we have Stillwater Veterans Memorial ball caps. They're beautiful ball caps. I wear this around everywhere, and we have those for sale at the table too as you go out or beforehand too. Okay, so with that, Summertime Quartet.
Thank you for inviting us to be a part of this special evening. And we'd like to recognize someone that is special here tonight and having a birthday. And he's talking right now, I think. John Kramer. Where's John Kramer? John Kramer, are you talking? Would you come up here, John?
Yes.
I understand that John has been very instrumental in the Veterans Memorial in Stillwater and probably a lot of other things that I don't know about, but I understand it's his birthday today. Is that correct?
That is correct.
He's having a birthday. So all of us are going to sing to John, okay? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear John. Happy birthday to you.
Rather surprised.
Thank you, John. Thanks for all you do. God bless America while we storm. Wow.
while the storm clouds gather far across the sea. Let us swear allegiance to a land that's free. Let us all be grateful for a land so fair, as we raise our voices in a solemn prayer. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home. My home. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home. America, my home.
This next song we'd like to do is one that we always do at veterans gatherings to recognize the different branches of our service and for those who have served. And so it's a Armed Forces medley. And so it has all of the songs of each branch of our services. And we're going to ask that if you can, that you would stand as we sing your particular service song. Or if you can't stand, maybe you can raise your hand, or we want to recognize you. So, Armed Forces medley. A flat. From the rising.
From the rising of the sun till the battle's fought and won, we will fight for the right and defend our country. We're always ready for the call. We place our trust in Thee. Through howling gale and shot and shell to win our victory. Semper Paratus is our guide, our pledge, our motto too. We're always ready, do or die. Coast Guard, we fight for you, for you. From the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, we will fight our country's battles, air, on land and sea. First to fight for right and freedom, and to keep our honor clean. We are proud to claim the titles of United States Marine. drink to the foam, until we meet once more. Here's wishing you a happy voyage home. First to fight for the right and to build the nation's might. Army was rolling along. Out of all we have done, fighting till the battle's won. Army was rolling along. Then it's hi, hi, hey, the army's on its way. Shout out your cadence loud and strong. Now where'er we go, you will always know that the army is rolling along. Oh, off we go into the wild blue yonder, climbing high into the sun. Down they come, coming to meet our thunder. At 'em, boys, give 'em the gun, give 'em the gun. Down we dive, spouting our flames from under. Off with one hell of a roar. We live in fame or go down in flames, or nothing can stop the U.S. Air Force. Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountains' majesties above the fruited plain. America, America, God shed his grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood. From sea to shining sea, from sea to shining sea. America, 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 America.
Special award, and that recognize and honor his colleagues and his efforts during World War II. And instead of me kind of telling you what it is, what I'd like to do is read what Congresswoman Betty McCollum entered into the congressional record a few weeks ago and subsequently presented to Bob on behalf of Congress and the people of the United States. So without further ado, the congressional record reads, honoring Robert Holmstrom of Maplewood, Minnesota, by the Honorable Betty McCollum. Mr. Speaker, dated Wednesday, June 27, 2018, I rise to honor Robert Holmstrom of Maplewood, Minnesota. Earlier this year, he, along with 13,000 men and women who formed the ranks of the Office of Strategic Services, were awarded the Congressional Gold Medal. Their heroic actions during World War II contributed greatly to the success of our nation's war efforts. So consequential were the missions they carried out that Robert and those with whom he served were sworn to secrecy for 40 years. The OSS served as a preeminent intelligence and special operations organization over the course of World War II and the precursor to what we now know as the Central Intelligence Agency. The OSS organized, trained, supplied, and fought in both the European and Pacific theaters, playing a decisive role in the Allied victory over Axis forces. The ranks of the OSS were comprised of exceptional citizens as well as members of every branch of the armed services. Their work was often conducted under conditions of extreme danger and in the most intense environments. The tide of the war may very well have turned against the Allies had it not been for the perpetual bravery and success of the men and women of the OSS. Now a little bit about Robert. An Army Air Corps trained pilot, Robert Holmstrom was recruited to fly missions for the OSS. Conducted under Operation Carpetbagger, the missions would take him and a crew in a blacked-out B-24 deep into Nazi-occupied France, where they dropped weapons, equipment, and OSS agents to assist French resistance fighters prior to the Allied invasion at Normandy on D-Day. Often flying in weather deemed unsafe for regular missions and only on moonlit nights so as to see the resistance fighters signaling them with flashlights, these airdrops were often flown at very low altitudes. Between January of 1944 and May of 1945, the men and women working under Operation Carpetbagger completed 1,860 sorties and delivered over 20,000 containers and over 11,000 packages of vital supplies to the resistance forces in Western and Northwestern Europe. Their success and bravery earned them the moniker of Carpetbaggers. Mr. Holmstrom returned to Minnesota, where he had a long and successful career in airline plant protection for Northwest Airlines. Mr. Speaker and ladies and gentlemen, please join me in honoring Robert Holmstrom and the many others like him who so admirably served our nation in the Office of Strategic Services during World War II. So if that inspired you as it must have inspired me, and to have someone in our mix to have the Congressional Gold Medal from Congress is very, very significant. And if that inspired you as much as inspired me, Bob does have some books for sale here. I would encourage you to buy one. A few of us have bought one, and I can't wait to read it. And, you know, there he is, right in the cover, right in the back, and his name, so you know it's him. So thank you very much, Bob.
We're here tonight with a special guest at the 18th Annual Stillwater Veterans Memorial Benefit Cruise. And with us tonight, amongst our World War II and Korean veterans, is Robert Holmstrom, a World War II veteran, tail gunner, who flew with the OSS. I'm going to ask Robert several questions and get his response related to his war experiences in World War II. Robert, how did you get into a service as a tail gunner with the OSS in World War II?
When I started out, I was going to be a fighter pilot, and they sent me to Shepherd Field, Texas, to take flight training. And in April of 1944, President Roosevelt polished all pilot training classes. So we were a little bit educated for that time, and so they chose us to be in the OSS. So we were sent to Idaho and fly through the mountains during the night. I never could figure out why. I found out when we went over to Europe and dropped spies behind the lines in Austria and Germany and France. So it made a very interesting life, I'll tell you, and quite dangerous on top of it. So that's what happened.
Robert, tell us about the night flights, the requirements for flying conditions for your night runs to resupply and drop spies at various locations throughout Western Europe.
We would fly at night below 500 feet in Europe, and we had a designated drop spot where we would get 3 lights in a row and one off to the side where we would drop supplies to the Patriots, whatever they needed. Groceries, bicycles, tires, gasoline, dynamite to blow up railroad tracks, medicine, anything they needed to survive the war and help the war end more quickly. They said if we hadn't done all we did, the war would have lasted at least another year and a half.
Robert, tell us about your coordinated missions with MI5 and British Secret Service.
When we went over there, MI5 had done the same thing that they taught us. SOE, Special Operations Executive of the British Royalty. They were the headquarters at 3 stories underground in London. And everything was communicated from there to our base. And we had a supply depot called Home. And it was about 50 miles away from our airfield, a secret place with netting over the top. And it was some of the people working in our outfit didn't know what we really did. It was so secret. No newspeople were allowed on our base and no politicians. It was strictly business. And so that's how it started out.
Robert, tell us about the pilot that flew your particular airplane and his qualifications as a pilot.
Our pilots in our group were top-notch pilots. They were selected because their ability to fly that B-24 was a very difficult airplane to fly. It didn't respond very well. It could be, most of the time we were overloaded and we would bounce down the runway, and at the end of our runway was a bunch of trees. By the time the war was over, there was a deep groove in those trees because it got stuck to our wheels and props just knocked it all down. But all our navigators had to be super deluxe too. At that time, there was nothing but a compass and a protractor and a time element, and to shoot the stars to tell exactly where we were. Not like today with the electronic equipment that everybody has.
Robert, tell us about the duration, the number of flights you took, and then when the flights stopped. I assume towards the end of World War II.
I flew 30 combat missions over France, Germany, Denmark, Netherlands, Austria, and we flew right through the end of the war, and which was in May. And when we flew over the Netherlands after the war was over, the Netherlands had made whitewashed rocks, and they printed out "Thanks, Liberators." That was very touching, I'll tell you. I had tears in my eyes when I flew over and seen that they really appreciated us.
Robert, tell us a little bit about the Congressional Gold Medal that you were awarded just very recently at the White House Annex in Washington, D.C.
In March of this year, 2018, I was summoned to go to the White House and get awarded the Congressional Medal. It's the highest medal that Congress can give away to a civilian. I was represented there by Betty McCullen, my representative from Minnesota. And then just recently, she had a private ceremony in her office in St. Paul. And that was so stirring. My daughter went with me as my historian, and it was very touching.
Robert, you're now the last living crew member of the plane that you flew in. Did you have an opportunity after the war to get together with crew and the pilot of your plane?
Oh yes, we meet. I'm the only survivor of my airplane right now, but we meet every year. Our 492nd Bomb Squadron, we're meeting in Palm Springs in October of this year. Every year we meet in a different city in the United States and get together. The widows, the nephews, friends still come. There's only approximately 10 or 11 of us veterans that'll be there, but we'll have about 100 and some people. Everybody's welcome, everybody's like a brother and sister to us, which is very, very nice. The camaraderie is terrific.
Robert, what did you then do in civilian life once out of the military?
When I got out of the military, I was married, of course, and my father-in-law, he did ceramic tile work and fancy work, mosaics, for Drake Marble and Tile in St. Paul. And I worked for them and retired from there. And my son retired out of there, and my grandson is still in the trade.
Robert, there's not a picture of the Congressional Gold Medal on the picture in front of you. Could you explain the awards that you have on this plaque here?
Well, the highest medal I have on this plaque here is the French Medal of Honor. It's red, it's in the direct center, and I have the French Croix de Guerre. They thought so much of us.
For our second special recognition, I'd like to invite to the podium Kevin Monio. Kevin is a former board member, and he's also former chair of the Stillwater Veterans Memorial. And Kevin has someone we'd like to recognize. Kevin.
Thank you, Dave. Good evening. Thank you for coming out to the Stillwater Veterans Memorial Cruise tonight. Thank you, all you fellow veterans and your spouses who make this possible and support us veterans. I'm a retired senior Army aviator and a Iraq War veteran. But first, I want to thank the Stillwater Veterans Memorial, Dave Rattay, for allowing me a quick 5 minutes here. I met a gentleman, he's a local Stillwater resident, World War II resident, and to me he's a hero. And this man served in the U.S. Army's 517th PRCT, which is the Parachute Regimental Combat Team. This combat veteran that I'm honoring is a man named Robert B. Weber. He's sitting at a table over here with his granddaughter. During his tenure in the U.S. Army, PFC Weber fought for our country with distinction and honor. He served in both southern France and Italy. He was wounded in action in Sospel, France, which is near the border of Italy. As a member of the 517th Regimental Combat Parachute Team, he parachuted into France just 2 days short of 74 years ago, 15 August 1944, Operation Dragoon. Operation Dragoon is the code name for the Allied invasion of southern France. PFC Weber had the special distinction and honor of being recognized by the country of France when he was awarded the Legion of Honor. The Legion of Honor is the highest French award and order of merit that the country of France gives out, and it is presented on behalf of the head of state. This medal is only awarded for excellent military conduct and service. The award was actually established in 1802 by Napoleon Bonaparte. Mr. Weber, please stand to be recognized. Would you remain standing, sir? Tonight, in honor of that jump, which I said again is 74 years ago today, his granddaughter Danielle here has a set of the World War II paratrooper wings, which she's going to repin on his chest in honor of that 74 year ago anniversary. So, and
Mr. Weber, and then Mr. Melvin Berg, I just discovered, was a member of the 517th with him, and I'm going to give him a set of jump wings in honor of that 75th anniversary as well. And to all the veterans and the men and women that served our country, I salute you. Thank you for your service.
Thank you very much, Kevin. That was great. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker for tonight, and I'm very excited to hear him, what he has to say. Jim Johns, he's a man of many talents. If you look at the different things he's done, it's incredible. He's a retired Army aviation captain. He had 18 years as an air traffic controller, 29 years as an ophthalmic optician, 40 years as an active pilot. I mentioned before he spent a lifetime as a military aircraft rebuilder and restorer, 13 in all, and has 5 of those aircraft in national museums. He was telling us tonight at the table that the last of which he did was BT-13, which is a basic trainer. He delivered last year to the Wasp Museum down in Texas. And he's the author of Reassessing Pearl Harbor, published in both the U.S. and Great Britain. You can find online in Amazon. I took time to go look at it on Amazon. Unfortunately, I thought I was going to bring some tonight to buy, so I didn't, but I'm going to go and buy it on Amazon. I invite you to do the same. And he currently resides in Bloomington, Washington, we were talking Washington earlier, Bloomington, Minnesota here with his wife Dorothea, and he has 3 children, 6 grandchildren. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Jim Johns to the podium tonight.
I'm going to kind of experiment with microphones here. Can you all hear me with this microphone? Okay, the main thing is, am I clear or am I garbled? Am I clear? Okay, then I will use this mic. My niece Wanda and I want to first thank you very much for the cordial reception and welcome that you have given us all tonight. Thank you very much. I want to talk to you tonight about something that you know everything about. The Japanese attack at Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. Not the attack that was the surprise while the United States and Japan were in negotiations, but the attack as it is recorded in the National Archives, the Library of Congress, and the Congressional Record, which is 180 degrees different from what the American public was told December 7th. First, a little background. If you recall, by the fall of 1940, Hitler had occupied virtually all of Europe to the point where only Britain stood, the last democracy in Nazi-occupied Europe. If Britain falls, Hitler will control the entire Atlantic Ocean, and with his tripartite partner, Japan, eyeing all the natural resources in the Pacific, we in the United States could find ourselves as hostages in our own country. Therefore, Britain had to be saved. But how? The American voting public was 90% against the war effort. And FDR knew he couldn't simply say, he just won his 3rd term on the promise not to go to war. He couldn't simply say that he'd changed his mind. Not on an issue of that magnitude. No, there had to be a way to get into the war in time to save Britain that would keep him in the good stead of the American voting public that had just re-elected him to his 3rd term on the promise to keep out of war. But how do you do that? How do you break the biggest campaign promise of an election and still stay in the hearts of the voters? FDR, his personal friend, confidant, and advisor, Harry Hopkins, burned a lot of midnight oil on that one. And what they came up with seemed so simple. We will just provoke Germany into declaring war on us. Well, Hitler wasn't born yesterday. He knew as soon as he was at war with the United States, the very first thing we would do would be to occupy Britain and that would dash his hopes of getting it forever. So he was not going to bite. But FDR had a lot of bait, all of it illegal from the standpoint of international law concerning a neutral nation. First off, if you recall, there was Lend-Lease. Lend-Lease would arm any nation on the face of this planet that was at war with any member of the tripartite pact, Germany, Japan, or Italy, with planes, tanks, and guns, all at American taxpayer expense. All they had to do was come and get it. And when some of them couldn't come and get it, FDR employed the Merchant Marine to deliver it, where half of Lend-Lease went to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, protected by the United States Navy, where at least 100 naval personnel went to the bottom in ships like the Reuben James, the Greer, the Salinas, against German U-boats while we're at peace with Germany. And then there was the rearming of British ships in U.S. East Coast ports, again illegal. And then there was the FDR occupation of Iceland and Greenland, which the newspapers said was really an invasion of Iceland and Greenland, and compared FDR with Hitler, just marching into any country that he so chooses. But nothing was happening. Hitler was not biting, and the clock was ticking down for Britain. Maybe FDR is going to have to save Britain through the Pacific. For 40 years, Japan had been on the march in the Pacific. Korea, Formosa, Manchuria, all the island chains, and then the Spratly Islands and the islands off mainland China. And then in 1937, the invasion of China itself. But it was the occupation of French Indochina, today's Vietnam, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. With that occupation, FDR turned off the faucet of exports to Japan. Imports for the Japanese that they direly needed to continue their military aggression in Asia. Unbelievably, at the time, Japan was importing 80% of the material that she needed to wage war. 88% of the 80% was coming from the United States. Coal, steel, iron, rubber, oil, aviation fuel. Well, it was as obvious to Tokyo as it was to Washington. Without these imports from the United States, Japan was going to have to look elsewhere to make up the difference, and we even knew where they were going to look. Java, Sumatra, Borneo, the Dutch East Indies for its oil, British Malaya for its tin and rubber. But to move against Malaya or the Indies would bring upon Japan the wrath of the American fleet based at Pearl Harbor, and no one dared suggest the outcome of such a confrontation. Unknown to Japan, as far back as 1939, as you know, the United States had broken Japan's most secret diplomatic code, referred to as Purple. The code that Japan used to send their most secret, their most sensitive diplomatic information between Tokyo and the Japanese embassies of the world. Not only had we broken it, but we'd invented a machine that would break the code and then translate it into English where we could read it. We were reading Japanese diplomatic codes to their embassies faster than their own embassies could translate them themselves. And then in the middle of November 1941, there was one that caught our eye. It thanked the Japanese ambassadors in Washington, Nomura and Kurusu, who, by the way, unlike the way the press reported them, were very honorable men. They were not deceiving and conniving like the news media painted them. They received a message from Tokyo, the middle of November 1941, thanking them for their efforts to get exports from the United States turned back onto Japan. but then continued on to say, after November 29th, your efforts will be make-believe. In other words, on or about November 29th or shortly afterwards, something was going to happen someplace. As far back as 1939, when the war started in Europe, Washington was concerned about the telephone system in the White House. The president is talking to diplomats all around the world. If some of these conversations were insecure, boy, that could be big trouble for the United States. So, in late 1939, Washington purchased for the White House from AT&T, the American Telephone and Telegraph, what was known as the Scrambler phone system, where the president in the White House could talk into the telephone, diplomats at the far end of the world could talk back, everything was crystal clear, but if anyone was eavesdropping or monitoring, it was a total garbled mess. And now Washington was very comfortable with FDR's telephone conversations from the White House. Unfortunately, AT&T never quite got around to telling Washington that they had sold the identical Scrambler telephone system to Nazi Germany in 1937, the year they invented it. After World War II, when our intelligence people were going into the countries that Germany had occupied in Europe and going through their intelligence records in Holland, we came across a telephone conversation that the Germans had actually recorded. It was a telephone conversation where Churchill is calling FDR in the early morning hours of November 26, 1941, 12 days before Pearl Harbor. The conversation actually got FDR out of bed. Churchill told FDR that British intelligence in Japan had just reported to London that a large Japanese task force consisting of 6 carriers, 2 battleships, and loads of support vehicles had just departed the Kuril Islands in northern Japan, headed straight east for Pearl Harbor, and would arrive in Hawaiian waters on Monday, December 8th. Upon hanging up from that phone call, 6 things happened in Washington within the 24 hours of that phone call that would dispel the belief of the most ardent person convinced that Pearl Harbor was a surprise. The first thing that happened was that the president notified the Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Harold Stark, CNO of the Navy, #1 man in the Navy, to forward to Admiral Kimmel, commander of the Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor, what has come to be known as the Vacant Sea Order. This order ordered Admiral Kimmel to clear all sea lanes from Hawaii to the Orient, commercial and military, coming or going. All shipping must divert by way of the Torres Straits, the straits between New Guinea and Australia, adding a week to their journey and hundreds of miles to the trip. The idea being to clear the way for the Japanese task force, because FDR feared that if Admiral Nagumo thought that they had been spotted and that Pearl Harbor was lying in waiting, he could be tempted to cancel the attack, which in fact was his prerogative. I've written a book on this subject, and no one has a larger collection of books on Pearl Harbor than I have, but I am the only one that has, out of the National Archives, enclosed a copy of this order to Admiral Kimmel. The purpose, of course, being that, if the Pearl Harbor fleet, of course, sailed out to meet Japan, that could spoil the united front that the United States needed to get into the war, especially in time to save Britain. Okay, that was the first thing. The second thing that happened within that 24 hours was what has come to be known as the secret White House conference. FDR convened a conference to consist of the Secretary of State, Secretary of the Navy, Secretary of War, the Chief of Staff, General Marshall, and all his subordinate officers. I will quote you from that meeting. President Roosevelt is speaking. When you know that you are going to be hit, the hardest thing in the world is just to stand there and let them do it, because you don't know how much of a knockout blow that first hit is going to be. But in this case, it is absolutely necessary that we let them do it, because it is the only way that we will have the solidarity of the American people behind a war effort. The art form is, how do we maneuver them to do it with little or no damage to ourselves? Which brought about the third thing that happened in that 24 hours. Another message to Admiral Kimmel in Hawaii. Get the carriers out of port right now, taking with them the fastest ships, leaving behind 8 old, slow World War I battleships. The next thing that happened was that when Admiral Nomura and Caruso arrived at the White House for their scheduled meeting with the Secretary of State, rather than talking about getting exports turned back onto Japan, the Secretary of State handed them what has come to be known as the 10-point note. For all practical purposes, unbelievably, 10 U.S. demands for war. Japan must immediately get out of all areas that they occupy. They must return the governments to those areas that were there when they took over. They must return the monetary system that was there. They must establish diplomatic relations. The ambassadors know that this will never happen. All they could do was get up and say, well, we'll pass it on. And they left. The fifth thing that happened was Washington sent weak war warnings to the Hawaiian commands, not telling them that, hey, we have just broken off diplomatic relations and demanded war, but rather, negotiations aren't going quite the way we'd preferred. Continue to be on the alert. The sixth thing that happened around the 24 hours of that phone call was that President Roosevelt notified the Census Bureau to start recording by state all first-generation Japanese living in this country. And when the whistle would blow immediately after December 7th, they would, think about this, they would be forced to, in 3 days, sell their businesses, sell their homes, pack up everything of value to them in a suitcase, and report to a scheduled appointed bus or train that would take them out into the middle of the desert in Utah, where 227,000 of them would live for the next 3.5 years behind barbed wire. On November 29th, things did automatically happen. Another message from Tokyo to the Japanese ambassadors, stating that Japan was about to declare war on at least one of 3 nations: Great Britain, United States, and or Soviet Russia. Now, obviously, in the interest of secrecy, Japan just can't come out and announce to their embassies with whom they're going to war, but the embassies will know with which nation or nations Tokyo is about to declare war on by the presence of a fake weather forecast. A different forecast meaning war with each nation. And that weather forecast would be inserted in the middle and at the end of the Japanese evening Tokyo news broadcast. So all the embassies would have to do with their shortwave radios is monitor the Japanese evening news and listen for the weather. The weather forecast meaning war with the United States would be the infamous Higashi no Kazuyami. Late at night, December 3rd, at the U.S. Navy Japanese radio monitoring station in Cheltenham, Maryland, the NCO on duty, Ralph Briggs, who spoke fluent Japanese, logged in the Higashi no Kazuyami. It was repeated 3 times. He logged it in, the date, the time, the frequency. He made 3 copies. He got on the telephone, passed it up the Army and Navy chains of command all the way to the president, where it disappeared with all traces off the face of this planet. FDR was in no hurry to alert Admiral Kimmel in Hawaii of the approach of the Japanese fleet because he would sail out to meet it, and there goes the surprise that FDR needs to unite the voters into a war effort, mainly in time to save Britain. Pearl Harbor, early in the morning, December 6, 1941. A story that many of you know. The USS Ward departs Pearl Harbor for its 1-week patrol, a very monotonous patrol that it shares with 2 other destroyers, and that is patrolling the 2-square-mile area outside the entrance of Pearl Harbor. Of the 120 men aboard the Ward, many of you know that 80 of them were St. Paul reservists that had been activated. But today, Saturday, December 6th, there's a change. They have a new skipper, Lieutenant William Outerbridge. This is his first command, and he steps aboard the Ward with only one order, and that is from the Chief of the Pacific Fleet, Admiral Kimmel, which is, if it doesn't belong there, sink it. But Outerbridge is also aware of his Supreme Commander's order, President Roosevelt, who has said that Japan must fire the first shot. 6:30 in the morning, Sunday, December 7th. The Ward is still patrolling back and forth. You know, they have a log that shows what ships are due out of Pearl Harbor and what ships are due in. So they know who belongs there and who doesn't. It's 6:30 in the morning. For all practical purposes, it's still 95% dark out. The USS Antares is approaching Pearl Harbor. It's about a mile out. The Pearl Harbor net gate has already opened. The USS Antares is pulling some distance behind it a 500-ton barge. The lookout on the Ward notices that there appears to be a periscope about midway between the fantail of the Antares and the bow of the barge. He can't really see the periscope in the dark, but what makes it so obvious is that feather of water following behind it. The watch studies it. He informs the bridge. The bridge studies it. They wake up the captain. Now the captain is studying it. I want you to put yourselves in the captain's position, Lieutenant Outerbridge. There is absolutely no reason to think that if there is a submarine there that they're looking at, that it's Japanese. There is no reason to think that it should be a Japanese submarine or a submarine of any other nation. But he's truly behind a rock and a hard place, because if he sinks that submarine and it belongs to the United States Navy, Outerbridge is in deep, deep, deep doo-doo. If he does not sink it, and it turns out to be a Japanese submarine that gets into Pearl Harbor and sinks an American ship, Outerbridge is in deep, deep, deep doo-doo. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. And this is his first command. Outerbridge orders the number 1 Dick gun to fire. It fires and misses. This is something that's always been humorous to me. The first shot of World War II missed. He orders the number 3 gun amidships to fire. It does and hits the target. Whatever was there disappears below the surface. Now, the ward immediately passes up the chain of command that they have just sunk something. First, it goes to Bishop Point, a communication station right inside the entrance to Pearl Harbor. And Bishop Point forwards it on. I have to give you a little explanation before I go any further so you'll know what's going on here. Admiral Kimmel is the commander of the Pacific Fleet. If it floats and it's in the Pacific, it belongs to Admiral Kimmel. But when the Pacific Fleet is in port, Kimmel is the renter. The port belongs to the United States Navy. In this case, the 14th Naval District. The 14th Naval District is commanded by Admiral Claude C. Block. So the ward sends the message of the sinking to Bishop Point, who forwards it on to Admiral Block. Now, it's 10 minutes to 7 in the morning. Is there anyone in this room that would call a 2-star at 10 minutes to 7 in the morning on a Sunday? His chief of staff, Captain Earl, took the call. Well, he was in no big hurry to get an admiral out of bed either. And besides, there had been a number of so-called sightings, most of them turning out to be whales, that he covered himself and said that he wanted the ward to send confirmation of the sinking. That was the death knell, because that confirmation is going to be very slow in coming, because almost immediately after sinking the Japanese submarine, the ward is attracted by something else. A Japanese fishing sampan, it's getting light out now, approaching the entrance to Pearl Harbor. And as the ward approaches the sampan, they immediately hoist the white flag of surrender, which brought a chuckle to some of the members of the ward. That's something that's only done in wartime. In other words, there were Japanese on Oahu that knew we were at war long before the first shot fell. Well, eventually, the confirmation got to Bishop Point, that got to Captain Earl, that woke Admiral Block, who was passing it on to the fleet commander as the first bombs are falling. Now, I want to close today with 2 scenarios that were so close that it's hard to imagine that they didn't actually happen. We know that 2,403 military personnel died at Pearl Harbor, December 7th. How many naval personnel, think about this, how many Navy people owe their life to Lieutenant Outerbridge aboard the Ward because he sunk the sub that, had it gotten into Pearl Harbor, would have hit their ship, and the 2,403 dead would have climbed disastrously. How many men unknowingly owe their life to Lieutenant Outerbridge? Or consider this one. What if, when the Ward sent the message of the sinking to Bishop Point, and Bishop Point forwarded it to Captain Earl, what if, rather than asking for confirmation of the sinking, Captain Earl would have called and gotten Admiral Block out of bed at 10 minutes to 7, and Pearl Harbor would have gone on alert 1 hour and 5 minutes before the first bomb fell. I want to thank you very much. You've been very attentive. Thank you, thank you.
Wow, if that doesn't leave you at a cliffhanger and want to get you the book, I don't know what will. So,
I don't know how to turn this off here. Push the button, but...
well, we were on mute, but I'll put you off here. Hang on a second there, Jim. Okay, so what I'd like to do is do a quick presentation to Jim on behalf of all of us underway here, and certainly the board. We want to give you this picture. Wow. So there you go. It's of the Veterans Memorial, so hopefully you'll find a great place for that to hang.
I will.
All right, thank you, Jim.
I thank you very, very much. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so we want to close out the night. Court's going to tell you who were the big winners for the silent auction. I forgot to mention we closed it at 7:30, but it's all closed now, so Court.
Thanks, Dave. Well, thanks for everybody that bid on items today and everybody that came to the cruise. We really appreciate it. I think the money goes to a really great place, supporting the memorial. So I've got the winners here. Please, if you want an item, come back. You can pay for it right now. Cash, check, or charge. Here's the winners: Ron Atzmiller, Wanda Heck, Josh and Christy Mack, Kevin and Shelly Manio, Pam Olson, Kai Susher, and Carol Van Valkenburg. Thanks, everybody.
All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're about to dock here. So, but before we do, so thank you all for coming here this evening. I trust you found the food delicious, the company charming, and the program entertaining. And again, we thank the St. Croix Boat and Packet for sponsoring cruise. We had Johnny's TV here who is filming us tonight. If you go to our YouTuber, you'll find it on YouTube here in a little bit. And then Valley Access channels. So Johnny's and Valley Access channels, thank you very much. They are always here. The Summertime Quartet singers and board members who helped a lot too, but in particular Dan Michaelis and John Kramer spent about 6 months getting this cruise together. We'd like to also thank First State Bank and Lake Elmo Bank. They're a kind of our unofficial sponsors. They give us an extra donation that can help go sponsor this program. So our goal is to provide quality programming for you all at our Veterans Memorial events. Again, this event helps do that, and we thank you for that. I'd like to mention once again that our honored guest, Congressional Gold Medal winner Bob Holmstrand, he's selling the books if you want to grab one on your way out. And we also, I believe, still have a copy. So if you received one last year, you may or may not want to get one again this year. But that frame picture, that frame print, we've got a copy for you all on the way out. It's not framed, but it is rolled up there. And Shelly's holding it up on the way out. If you want to grab that picture, please do. And it's a local artist, Randy Radance, painted that. So what's next up for the memorial? Our annual Veterans Day ceremony held on Sunday, November 11th. That is Sunday, November 11th, and it's at the 3rd and Pine Street. It's at 11:30, and just after a separate 11 o'clock ceremony that goes downtown, we'll hold our ceremony up at the Veterans Memorial at 11:30. So in the meantime, I bid you safe travels home tonight and a pleasant tomorrow. Good day.